My name is Lisa, and I'm HIV positive.
My name is Norman, and I'm also HIV positive, and I'm Lisa's fiance.
My name is Dawn Wolf. I'm HIV positive, and my son Niall has AIDS. I never thought that I would be speaking about this disease from a personal aspect of it, because they talked first of all about homosexuals getting it, then they spoke about IV drug users. I wasn't in either of those groups.
And the reality is that in the state of Wisconsin today, that there are 16,000 people who are infected with the AIDS virus. In Milwaukee County alone, the conservative projections are that about 8,000 people are infected with the AIDS virus.
The only sexual relationship I ever had was with my ex-husband, so there's another group that they're saying, you know, if you've had many sexual partners. I only had one, so I thought I was safe. However, when you go to bed with one person, you're going to bed with everyone they've been to bed with, or basically, if they've gotten something through doing drugs, you're getting it from having sex with them. And you are not always aware of what your partner's past has been.
The reality is that over the first 10 years in Wisconsin, 13% of the AIDS cases that have been documented are individuals who were infected with the AIDS virus during their teenage years. And we know that that percentage is growing dramatically now. In Milwaukee, we know 50% of teenagers are sexually active. 2/3 do not use condoms when they are sexually active. We also know that we as a city have the highest teen pregnancy rate of any city in the country. We also know that there is an interface between the drug culture and teenagers in our city. So what we have is a very young population that is very apathetic, that is engaging in the risk behaviors that put them at risk for AIDS.
I contracted it through heterosexual sex. In other words, basically unprotected sex.
We get a lot of calls on the AIDS line from adolescents, and we will ask them, how old are you? Have you talked about this with your parents? And they will say, no, I can't talk about this to my parents. And I know that there are a lot of parents who feel they can't talk about issues like this with their children. If they feel they can't, then therefore they should take their children to someone who really can.
I found out I was HIV positive in May of 1990. I found out 2 days after I found out I was pregnant with my son.
I was HIV positive, and a year later, I was diagnosed with full-blown AIDS.
And, you know, we decided to get engaged and get married. And we really wanted a big church wedding with all the trimmings. But we had to look at it realistically. If we sank $5,000 into a wedding, that was a year from now. Was Norman going to be here a year from now? So we had to opt for something a little smaller, a little more casual and informal, but with just as much meaning. So we planned something 4 months in the future, which is a little more realistic for our health conditions.
A case manager works with a client to help them obtain the services that they need. That may be services within the agency here that Milwaukee AIDS Project provides, or external that the community provides, either from the private sector or the public sector.
They helped us find an apartment. They helped us financially get into that apartment. They've helped us with food from the food pantry, rides to doctor's appointments, getting our entitlements straightened out, and basically support. Every time Norman's been sick, there's been somebody, whether it's a paid employee or a volunteer or just a friend that I know through MAP that I can call and cry, you know, what's going to happen next? What do I have to deal with next?
It's not our responsibility to try and change the client. We're there to provide emotional support for the client. We're there for them to talk about the HIV virus if they choose to do that. We're there to talk about possibly the lack of support from their family or friends, or maybe the reaction that they get from people, experiences that they've had in the hospital, on-call listener.
Having to deal with this disease is one of the worst things that anybody could actually have to deal with, because sooner or later with this disease, I mean, death will come. There's no telling when it'll come, but eventually, I mean, you'll have to die from it.
The street outreach program is charged with the responsibility of targeting certain populations that are not normally served by any other agency or entity in the community. Our target population are prostitutes, drug addicts, IV drug users, and the homeless. Your daughter could be dating, someone who's an IV drug user. Your daughter could be an IV drug user, herself, and you don't even know that. And, granted, we may not want drugs to be, used and abused out here, but they are. We may not want teens to have sex, but they do. And I think that, we just have no choice but to at least prepare people to be as safe as they can be in whatever activity that they choose. By the same token, I think we balance that by providing people with appropriate, adequate information and knowledge about alternatives to what they're doing.
You never think it's going to happen to you. And if it doesn't happen to you, it's going to touch you in some way. It's going to be your brother or your sister or your aunt or your uncle or your cousin or your friend or somebody you know. It's going to touch you somehow. Maybe not personally, as you being infected, but it's going to touch you somehow.
We need to take HIV out of the closet of shame and guilt. And the more that anyone in the public can do, the better. I recently had a situation a few months back. One of my clients died, and his mother was not able to tell anyone that her son died of this disease. She had another son who, his way to deal with his brother dying of this disease was to be open about it. So much conflict there in that family situation because there was so much shame because a son died with HIV disease. That shouldn't have to happen any longer. We ought to be able to talk about HIV disease and how it affects it. And again, that's where we need to take judgment out of HIV disease.
At the time that I was pregnant with Niall, I didn't know that I was infected with HIV. And when I found out that I was infected, my first question was, what about the boys? I had to have both of them tested. My older son tested HIV negative. Niall did test positive for the virus. He is diagnosed full-blown AIDS. It was indeed in utero that he was infected. Niall gets counseling to deal with his feelings about his own illness as well as his feelings about my illness and the thought that I'm going to die. He works out a lot of it in play therapy. So I think it's very important for the kids to have the support group here at MAP so that they learn that they aren't unique in this situation and learn how other kids are dealing with it also.
I think what people need to take into consideration when it comes to AIDS or the HIV virus is that someone else isn't going to do it. For 6 or 7 years, I just assumed that somebody else was going to take care of the people with AIDS, and I didn't become involved in the project. What I've learned since I'm becoming a volunteer, or since I've become a volunteer, is that someone else isn't going to do it.
In 1992, we're looking at an additional 750 job slots for volunteers to fill, in addition to the 600 that they did last year. And those cover the breadth of opportunities at the Milwaukee AIDS Project as well as the AIDS Resource Center. Can make an enormous difference staffing our food pantry. It means 2 more hours that clients would have availability to come in and get much needed nourishment for themselves. 3 hours a week during the middle of the day can make an incredible difference on the Wisconsin AIDS line, can make the difference between somebody calling and getting the message, could you hold for an operator please, and sitting there waiting to find out, how do I get an HIV antibody test? Am I at risk?
The most rewarding thing that I found out, that I found at MAP, is the fact that I've learned so much. And when I share this information and people are so appreciative that you've shared it with them, it really gives me a good feeling inside.
If you want to do one thing for me, in my memory, if there hasn't been a cure found for AIDS yet, go out, talk to the children, talk to everybody and tell them you lost your mother to AIDS.
If we move ahead to 1995, the projections indicate that in Milwaukee County as many as 12,000 people will be HIV infected, and that as many as 24,000 to 26,000 people will be infected statewide. So we reside in an area here in Milwaukee that truly is what I would call the epicenter of the epidemic. And as we look ahead to the future, there is great concern because we have thousands and thousands of people who are standing on the doorstep of the Milwaukee AIDS Project, the health and social service system, who will be turning to us for support services and for vital medical care.
When you have a chronic disease, you learn to put on a front that you go on, because if you're going to have any quality to your life, you have to learn how to cope with it. In that respect, it's like many other chronic illnesses, but that there's much more psychological play, I think, into this disease, because you're always wondering, is this the time when the bomb is going to go off? Is this the beginning of the end? I also think that most people still think that it can't happen to them, and I'd like to tell them that it can happen to them.
I think for me what has been the greatest gift, if you will, in the job is learning, number one, that life is short and that it's very precious. Working with people with HIV disease has helped me to learn that in a whole new way and has helped me to appreciate my life all the more. What we try to do here, I think, is we try to help people live with this disease. So often in the past, when someone has been diagnosed HIV positive or had an AIDS diagnosis, they've thought, that's it, my life is over. What we're trying to do is help people learn to live with the disease. All too often, at this point in time, the end result of there is no cure presently, there is no cure currently on the near horizon. I can only continue to work here having that hope that a cure will be found. It is difficult to see people in the prime of their lives die over and over. This past year at our memorial service, we remembered 78 people who had died since last May. And I anticipate those numbers just to continue to grow and grow. The public needs to wake up. HIV disease is here, and it's unfortunately here for a long time. All of us need to do whatever we can to help prevent it and then to work with those who have it.